have been married to Andrew for 5 years, known by everyone as the perfect Mrs. Liu, always proper and graceful. I even earned the title of #1 perfect wife from a gossip magazine. Everyone envies me for marrying a good husband, but they have no idea what kind of role I actually play in this marriage. For 5 years, he remained distant and indifferent, and slowly, my passion for chasing him faded away. I know I was never that person in his heart, the one he could never let go of, so I asked for a divorce and moved out. But a week later, he cornered me at the door of my new home. Divorce? He looked at me, his eyes red. Alicia, say that again? Chapter 1. This afternoon, Secretary Lee sent me a message. Madam, Mr. Liu has a business dinner tonight and will be home around 10:30. I stared at my phone for a while before replying. All right. Thank you. 10:30. He would have already eaten by then. I only needed to fill the bathtub and put his fresh clothes in the bathroom. Once everything was ready, it was just past 10. I thought for a moment, left a light on in the living room, and went to bed, half asleep. I heard the door open, water ran in the bathroom, and as I drifted off, the mattress beside me suddenly sank. Warmth pressed against my cool back. I turned my head drowsily, and his lips found mine precisely. Why are you sleeping so early? He whispered hotly in my ear. Just tired, I murmured, trying to push him away, but he wouldn't budge. Forget it. After he was satisfied, it was late into the night. He fell into a deep sleep, but I couldn't fall back asleep. I got up, poured myself a glass of red wine, and sat alone in the living room, staring at the wedding photo on the wall. When would be the right time to bring up the divorce? Chapter 2. I met Andrew in college. Back then, he was the perfect golden boy, great family, smart, handsome, flawless in every way. It was only natural that I developed feelings for him. I wasn't afraid of anything back then, and I was shameless. Unfortunately, after 2 semesters of chasing him and doing countless silly things, I still couldn't win his heart. I remember a snowy day when I had knitted a scarf for him and waited for him outside the boys' dorm, only to hear him say coldly, "Alicia, stop looking for me. I have someone I like." I refused to accept it at first, thinking it was just an excuse, until one day, I saw her, Margarita. I watched as he gently took off his coat and draped it over her, whispering softly to comfort her as she cried, tenderly stroking her hair, and then, he gently lifted her chin and kissed her. That was when I knew Andrew could be gentle, could worry and care deeply for someone, but that someone wasn't me. Word spread quickly around campus about Andrew and Margarita, the perfect golden boy, and the poor scholarship student, and Margarita became the subject of rumors and gossip. Andrew even managed to get the school forum shut down to protect her. Yet, such a passionate love didn't have a perfect ending. Andrew never told me why they broke up, but I heard it was because he wanted Margarita to marry him after graduation, and she refused. She said she didn't want to depend on a man and wanted to carve out her own path. Many people had seen them arguing on campus, fighting, making up, fighting again, until the day Margarita decided to return to her hometown to become a village teacher. That was when they broke up. Half a year later, Liu family and Su family had a joint project, and Andrew and I crossed paths again, working on the project. We became close once more. Looking back now, I probably took advantage of the situation. I was still as good to him as I had been years ago. I would remind him not to drink too much during business dinners, and I would make porridge and bring it to his office. 3 months later, on a snowy night, he saw me shivering in the cold outside his company building. He suddenly walked over and asked, "Alicia, do you really like me that much?" I looked at him blankly and nodded. Yes, I had always liked him. He smiled. Then, "Do you want to marry me?" Chapter 3. When we first got married, I was filled with enthusiasm for this marriage. In fact, for most of the past 5 years, I was always enthusiastic about it, because I loved him. I even naively believed that the reason he proposed to me was because he loved me too. So even though he rarely replied to my messages, even though I had to learn about his schedule through his secretary, even though we had no intimate interactions besides the routine aspects of married life, my unwavering love for him never wavered. I knew he was busy, so I never made trouble for him. Even when I was sick, I went to the hospital alone, until one day, I accidentally found a box containing documents that revealed he had been anonymously donating to a rural primary school for years. The principal of that rural primary school, to thank the anonymous donor, would handwrite a letter every year expressing her gratitude and have it delivered through an intermediary organization. Those letters were neatly arranged in the box, without a single crease, and the principal of that rural primary school was Margarita. Chapter 4. The next morning, I was in the kitchen making breakfast when Andrew suddenly walked up behind me. I was startled and turned to look at him. "Are you having breakfast at home today?" He nodded. I glanced awkwardly at the ingredients in my hand. In the past, I always prepared 2 breakfasts, regardless of whether he would eat at home. Because he was home so rarely, I cherished every chance we had to eat together. But lately, I had stopped making 2 servings. It felt like a bit of a waste. "Then, you can have this one first. I'll make mine later." I plated the omelet and handed it to him. He looked at the plate, seemingly taken aback. "Eat it while it's hot. I'll go do my makeup. I need to accompany Grandma to see Mrs. Liu this morning." I set down the glass of milk and turned to leave. "Ollie." He suddenly grabbed my arm. Hesitating, I turned back, puzzled. "What's wrong?" He pulled me into his arms so abruptly that I almost lost my balance. "Have you been tired lately?" he asked, looking at me. "Tired?" Yes, I was tired. Thinking about the divorce had worn me out. "I don't have much going on tonight. Old Lee mentioned there's a new Michelin restaurant near the office, serving Cantonese cuisine that you like. Want to go together?" I was stunned and confirmed. "You have time tonight?" He nodded. "How long?" He smiled, brushing my earlobe. "A lot." "A lot?" I suddenly felt happy. "Really?" He smiled. "Of course." "Great. I'll come to the office tonight to meet you." I jumped off him, feeling much lighter. He had time. Wonderful. It meant that tonight I could finally talk about the divorce. Chapter 5. However, that evening, I still didn't get to see Andrew. He broke his promise. At 5 in the afternoon, just as I was about to leave, I received a message from Secretary Lee. Andrew had something come up and couldn't make it to dinner. This had happened countless times over the past 5 years, so I was used to it. I changed out of my clothes and prepared dinner for one. After eating, I sat by the window, watching as the sky gradually darkened. I picked up my phone and idly scrolled through short videos. And then, in a trending local video, I saw Andrew. He wasn't alone. Margarita was there too. They sat across from each other, with the background showing the cafe on the first floor of Andrew's company. The video seemed to have been taken by one of Andrew's employees, who excitedly narrated, "Look at the perks of working at our company. You can run into our big boss and the famous educator Principal Lin having coffee together after work. Principal Lin looks even better in person than on TV. I really want to ask her for an autograph." The video was posted 5 minutes ago. The comments were full of compliments. "Handsome boss and beautiful teacher, such a lovely sight. I'm so jealous of the person who took this. Girl, is your company hiring? I want to work there too." I watched the video for a while and then turned off my phone. So, Andrew broke his promise because of Margarita. For some reason, even though I was his legitimate wife, it felt like it was only natural that he would break his promise because of her, even after 5 years of marriage. What did it mean? In his heart, there was probably no comparison between Margarita and me. Chapter 6. At 9:30, Andrew finally came home. "What did you have for dinner?" He walked over and sat beside me, showing an unusual concern for my dinner. I didn't answer. Instead, I softly asked, "Did you break our plans tonight because Margarita came?" He paused, seemingly surprised, with a hint of annoyance. "Who told you?" I shook my head. "No one. I saw it in a video." After a moment, he sighed lightly. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to overthink it. Don't worry, there's nothing between us. I had anonymously donated to her school before, and somehow it got leaked. She brought a TV crew to express her thanks. She had a tight schedule, so I accommodated the interview. We met in the company cafe, and many employees were around. Ollie," he said, touching my hair, "we've been married for 5 years. We have some trust between us. Don't we? I should be free again tomorrow. We can go have that Cantonese food." "Andrew," I suddenly interrupted him. "I don't actually like Cantonese food." "You do." "I only said I liked it so we could eat together more often." He was taken aback. "We've been married for 5 years. Do you know what kind of food I like?" He said nothing. Of course he didn't. He never tried to find out. After hours of pent-up emotions, I held back the urge to yell at him, but I still asked a sharp question. "So you remember Margarita likes black coffee and croissants?" But you don't know what your own wife likes to eat? Alicia. He frowned. If you have complaints about me, we can talk it through, but don't bring Margarita into this. Of course, I had barely mentioned her, and he was already upset. Tonight, I do have something to discuss with you. I took a deep breath and turned to look at him. Andrew, let's get a divorce. Chapter 7. The silence hung in the air for about a minute. Alicia. Andrew leaned back slightly. Do you know what you're saying? I do. Divorce isn't something you can just say lightly. I know. The silence continued. After a while, Andrew pinched the bridge of his nose, his voice tinged with helplessness. Maybe my tone earlier wasn't great, but you're talking about divorce just because I met with Margarita once? I bit my lip, feeling like he missed the point. If I really wanted to cheat, I wouldn't do it this way. You know how I operate after 5 years of marriage. Yes, I did know. If he wanted to do something, he'd do it flawlessly. If he wanted to achieve something, he'd plan everything to guarantee success. But did he know me? Did he ever love me? After seeing the video tonight, the sense of inferiority I'd felt during college, when faced with Margarita, came rushing back. The truth was right in front of me. As long as Margarita was in the picture, Andrew would never see me. But as an adult, still obsessing over love seemed almost laughable. I just feel that after all these years, we're not really suited for each other. You could have better options. What's not suited? He seemed amused, naturally reaching out his hand. You've been doing great these 5 years, but I don't want to continue. I avoided his hand, moving to the side. Andrew's hand hung in midair. I've already prepared the divorce papers. Alicia. He suddenly interrupted. I've explained everything about Margarita, and I've promised not to have any further involvement with her. What more do you want? His voice deepened. If you're really stuck on tonight, then you're just being unreasonable. His words choked back whatever I was about to say. Oh, it seemed tonight wasn't the right time to talk. Perhaps realizing his tone wasn't good, he softened his voice after a while, touching my hair gently. Don't be like this, okay? With that, he got up to take a shower. Watching his back, I whispered, I had spicy hot pot for dinner. He paused mid-step. That was my favorite dish. Chapter 8. What? Divorce? The next day, my brother, Su Chi, widened his eyes like saucers after reading the divorce papers. Since Andrew and I got married, the Liu and Su families had worked together more closely. I figured it would be best to let my brother know if I planned to divorce. I mean, sure, when you first got married, it seemed like he was kind of forced into it. But I thought you two were always so loving after that. Andrew treats you well. My brother spoke while swinging his golf club. What did you say? Forced into it? Brother? Well, he rubbed his forehead, seemingly regretting his slip of the tongue. 5 years ago, didn't the Liu family need a large sum of money to get through a tough period? You were always hanging around him. So when Andrew came to me, I might have hinted. Just a little. I stared at him, dumbfounded. What did you hint? My brother looked away, uncomfortable. I told him that if we became in-laws, I'd definitely help with the funding. I stood there, feeling my blood run cold. Sis? My brother looked at me, concerned. What else? My nails dug into my palm. What else don't I know? He hesitated. Brother, I'm getting a divorce. There's nothing left to hide. It's nothing major. Just, on your wedding day, Andrew's ex-girlfriend showed up. I stared at him in shock. She wanted to see Andrew, but I was afraid of causing a scene. So I told her you two were very much in love and that Andrew wouldn't want to see her. I sent her away. He scratched his head. There were also some Liu family members there, so I'm not sure if Andrew even knew she came. So that was it. That was the truth. I thought he proposed to me because he had some feelings for me. But this marriage was something he did for his company. For the Liu family, a sacrifice he made. That night, 5 years ago, when he asked, Alicia, do you really like me? It meant this. Do you like me enough to force me into this marriage? So he married me, but he drew a line between us. He never allowed me to cross it. When we first got married, I loved messaging him, asking when he'd come home, if we could go out over the weekend, and sharing every little thing in my life with him. But he rarely replied. If there was something urgent, he'd have his secretary contact me. Gradually, I spoke less. I stopped bothering him. Even my primary contact became Secretary Lee. We had a normal married life. He would whisper sweetly in my ear, calling me Ollie over and over. I always thought that was proof of our love, but I had mentioned having children several times, though he never outright refused. He always made sure to take precautions. Looking back now, I doubt he ever planned to have children with me. After all, I was just Mrs. Liu, nothing more. Last night, he asked why I still wasn't satisfied. Even after he promised not to have anything to do with Margarita, the two of them had a chance to start over on our wedding day. But because of me, they missed that chance, perhaps forever. How could I, the villain, ask for anything more? But when I fell in love with him, it wasn't supposed to be like this. When he was with Margarita, I envied her, but I never wanted to be a third party, let alone break them up. I loved him, and I wanted what was best for him. Yet he chose to punish me, for 5 long years. Chapter 9. I walked aimlessly through the streets, and before I knew it, I found myself outside Andrew's office building. The divorce papers were still in my bag. I decided to send a message to Secretary Lee, telling him I was at the office to see Andrew. I wanted a divorce. I didn't want to drag it out any longer. As I walked into the lobby, I saw Margarita. She was smiling and speaking with the receptionist. When she heard my footsteps, she turned and saw me. She looked thinner than in the video, slightly tanned, and though she wore a simple jacket and jeans, she exuded confidence, maturity, and composure. Long time no see. She nodded at me. We went to the cafe on the first floor together. I didn't expect to find croissants and black coffee that taste just like the ones from our college cafe here. It brings back memories. She smiled. College days were wonderful. She began telling me about her experiences over the past few years. She truly was impressive. After returning to her hometown to work as a rural teacher, she helped many children who were out of school. The school was now on the right track, and she had become well known. "You're amazing," I said sincerely. She smiled. People only see the glamorous side. Back then, I struggled a lot. She took a sip of her coffee. "Actually, I came to see Andrew on your wedding day." My hand holding the cup instantly went cold. Back then, I was arrogant because I knew I was loved. I recklessly made the decision to break up with him, and it hurt him. But after I went back to become a rural teacher, I realized how big the gap was between idealism and reality. Many things were much harder than I imagined. I nearly gave up so many times. In my lowest moments, I wanted to give up everything and come back to him. But then I heard you two were getting married. "I'm very sorry," I said. She looked startled. "I didn't know you came that day." She looked down, saying nothing. "I'm planning to divorce Andrew," I said. Meeting her eyes, Margarita's eyes widened. "Don't joke about that," she said, suddenly smiling. "Over the years, I've seen you often in the media. People always praise you as the perfect Mrs. Liu. I'm serious. Can I ask why?" She said softly after a long moment. "Why do you want a divorce?" I shook my head. "Why? Because I'm tired. I also want someone who loves me enough to let me be selfish just once." Chapter 10. Just then, a familiar voice called out from the entrance of the cafe. "Ollie." Margarita and I both turned around. It was Andrew. He walked over quickly, pausing briefly when he saw Margarita, then frowned as he looked at me. "Why did you suddenly come to the office?" Seeing his expression, I immediately understood. He probably thought I had come specifically to cause trouble for Margarita today. "Andrew." Margarita also stood up. "I'm sorry for intruding again. I have a few education charity projects to discuss with you, the ones I mentioned before. Since I have some time today, I thought I'd come by." "All right. I'll have my secretary take you upstairs." With that, Andrew called over Secretary Lee, who was standing by the door, and had him take Margarita away. I thought he would follow them, but to my surprise, he remained in place, looking at me. I was puzzled. Was he planning to send Margarita away just to settle accounts with me in public? This favoritism, it was too obvious, too out of place. Left with no choice, I decided to explain first. "Andrew, it's not what you think. Are you feeling unwell?" I was stunned, not quite understanding. He had already stepped closer and taken my hand. "You look so pale, and your hands are freezing." Chapter 11. Several Liu employees walked by, sneaking glances and whispering to each other. Suddenly, I realized why he was acting so out of character. Andrew and I rarely appeared together in public, especially in informal settings like this. He was probably worried I might confront Margarita, so he sent her away and put on a show of affection in front of the staff to prevent any rumors that could harm her reputation. I didn't mind, since we were getting a divorce anyway. Helping him and Margarita put on an act didn't bother me. Besides, if he was in a good mood, maybe the divorce would go more smoothly. Thinking this, I looked up and gave him a polite smile. I'm fine. Don't worry. You have business to discuss with Principal Lin, so go ahead. I'll leave now. With that, I pulled my hand away, picked up my bag, and prepared to leave. But he stopped me, frowning. Where are you going? I paused. He pulled me closer and suddenly pressed his hand to my forehead. You have a slight fever. I'll take you to the hospital. Chapter 12. Andrew pulled me into the car, leaving me feeling a bit exasperated. I thought he was just using this as an excuse to get me away from the office. But to my surprise, he actually drove me to the hospital. It's nothing serious. Her temperature is normal. It's just low blood sugar. How long has this been going on? The doctor asked Andrew. Andrew seemed momentarily taken aback. It's been a few years. I answered for myself. The family should pay more attention. Make sure she always has some sugar on hand, the doctor said while writing in the medical record. Low blood sugar can be serious. It can cause not only palpitations and fatigue but also, in severe cases, lead to unconsciousness. Andrew nodded. Okay, it's really nothing, doctor, I added, feeling like this was being blown out of proportion. I always carry candy and snacks with me. After the checkup, I wanted to leave quickly, but Andrew kept pestering the doctor, asking for more information. He seemed oddly interested in low blood sugar all of a sudden. On the way out of the hospital and to the parking lot, Andrew held my hand tightly the entire time. After all the fuss, I actually started to feel a bit dizzy. Once we got into the car, I took out a grapefruit candy from my bag, unwrapped it, and popped it into my mouth. The air inside the car was stifling. I closed my eyes. I wasn't sure how long we drove until the car finally stopped. Are we there? I asked groggily. Red light. Oh. Silence filled the car for a moment before he suddenly asked softly, why didn't you ever tell me? I looked at him, confused. I didn't understand what he was asking. You've been unwell. It can't be the first time, he said, pulling over to the side of the road. Why didn't you tell me before? I did, I said quietly. What? He seemed stunned. When we first got married, there was a week when you came home late every night. On Friday, I had low blood sugar and was lying in bed. I texted you, asking if you could come back early and buy me some candy. I smiled. You didn't reply. You probably forgot, after all. I sent you so many messages back then. Forgetting is normal. And another time, you might remember this one, we were doing an interview for a magazine, and the reporter accidentally knocked over my bag on the couch, spilling all the candy and snacks on the floor. You weren't happy about that. After the interview, you specifically told me not to carry so much useless stuff in my bag. Why didn't I tell him? Because he never gave me the chance to act vulnerable around him, and I was always afraid that any little flaw of mine would become a reason for him to dislike me. He didn't like candy and snacks, so I kept them in the inner pocket of my bag, out of his sight. He didn't like weakness, so I tried my best to seem mature and independent. Ollie, he suddenly took my hand. I actually found a Sichuan restaurant. I wanted to take you there tonight. His hands seemed to tremble slightly. But since you're not feeling well, let's go somewhere lighter instead, okay? I shook my head. I want to go home and have some porridge. You don't need to stay. Go back to the office. Ollie, I have time tonight, he insisted. I couldn't help but remind him. But Margarita is still waiting for you at the office. The deputy can handle that. I looked at him, confused. So, you really are free tonight? He nodded. Yes, I'm free. Then, I thought for a moment. Since you're free, let's go home. He nodded, a hint of joy flashing in his eyes. All right, let's go home. I suddenly felt happier too. When we get home, let's have a proper talk about the divorce. Chapter 13. For the rest of the drive, Andrew didn't say a word. He was a perceptive man, and I think by now, from last night to today, he understood that I was serious about the divorce. When we got home, I calmly took out the divorce papers. He looked at them, his eyes growing colder. Who helped you draft this? Su Chi? I paused for a moment. No one. I did it myself. I hesitated. I spent a month on it, trying to consider everything. The divorce won't affect you or the Liu family. I'll only take the dowry I brought with me when we got married. If there's anything else you'd like to add, we can discuss it. He suddenly let out a bitter laugh. A month? You've been thinking about divorce for a month? I know you're busy, so I wanted to prepare everything before talking to you. I paused again and added, this way, we can do it quickly, without wasting your time. I don't agree. He pushed the papers back to me. I froze. Which part do you disagree with? I flipped through the papers, feeling confused. Is it the clause about shares? I've already made the biggest concession I can. If I ask for any less, I'm afraid my brother will. He suddenly pressed his hand on the papers. I don't agree to the divorce. He looked at me, speaking each word clearly. Our eyes met, and he seemed very serious. Why? As soon as I asked, I realized, oh, is it because you think I've done well these past 5 years, and you're afraid your next wife won't be as competent and might face criticism? You don't need to worry about that. Although it's exhausting, as long as she's willing to put in the effort, she'll do fine. I thought about it and went to the bookshelf, taking out 5 notebooks. These notebooks contain details on social etiquette, dealing with the media, what to say and not to say in different situations, and what to wear. I can hand these over to your future wife, and if she ever needs help, she can come to me anytime. Ollie, he suddenly raised his voice, sounding as if he was suppressing anger. I looked at him, confused. What do you think of our marriage? What do you think of me? Am I just another job to you? I said nothing, turning my gaze to the window. How could it be just a job? It was because I valued our marriage so much that I worked so hard to be the perfect supportive wife. But now, what was the point of saying any of this? Ollie, he sighed, taking my hand from the table. You need to understand. This isn't a job. We're husband and wife. But apart from sharing a bed, there's nothing about us that feels like a real marriage. He paused. The number of times we have meals together each month is fewer than I can count on one hand. I send more messages to Secretary Lee than I do to you. I may not know what other marriages are like, but I know that this isn't what I want. I gently pulled my hand away. Andrew, I've thought a lot about this recently. There's nothing wrong with you in this marriage. I was the one who pursued you, who wanted to marry you. You've never cheated on me. You've never treated me badly. And your parents have always been kind to me. The problem is that I've always had unrealistic expectations for this marriage. Life could go on like this, but I believe we should be with someone we love and who loves us back. After all, being with someone you truly love would make you happier, wouldn't it? He stared at me, stunned. Someone I truly love? He suddenly asked. Who do you think that is? I shook my head. I don't know, but no matter who it was, Margarita or someone else, it wasn't me. Chapter 14. The next morning, I moved out of our house and returned to an apartment I had bought before getting married. The previous night, we had sat in silence for a few minutes before Andrew got up to take a call and then left the house. He didn't come back all night. He took the divorce papers with him. I assumed that meant he agreed to the divorce. After all, it didn't cost him anything. The wedding ring on my left hand was the only gift Andrew had given me in 5 years. Before leaving, I took it off and left it on the bedside table. I had barely finished packing when my brother called. What's going on? Why did Andrew call me first thing this morning to ask what kind of candy you like? My brother's voice was full of exasperation. Are you getting divorced or not? I paused. Yes. Brother. I thought for a moment and asked, does our family still own that small media company that's been struggling? My brother confirmed. It's been unprofitable for years. I was thinking of cutting our losses and shutting it down. Then, I looked out at the vast blue sky from the 26th floor window. Could you give it to me? Chapter 15. In the early evening, I unexpectedly received a message from Andrew. I'll pick you up for tonight's gala. I stared at my phone, feeling a bit dazed. Messages like this usually came from Secretary Lee. No need. I'll go by myself while we're going through the divorce process. I'm not staying at home. I've moved out. There was no reply after that. It made sense. But an hour later, when I went downstairs to get my car, I saw Andrew. I didn't know how long he'd been waiting there. He looked tired, with bloodshot eyes. I'd never seen him so disheveled. Why are you? His eyes seemed to brighten at the sight of me. He walked over quickly and grabbed my hand, but then froze. Where's your ring? He asked. I took it off. Why? We're getting divorced. I don't need it anymore. Alicia! His voice carried a restrained anger. I haven't agreed to the divorce. I blinked at him in confusion. You haven't agreed? You didn't say you disagreed last night. You even took the divorce papers. He looked at me for a long moment, then pulled me closer. seemingly helpless. Not saying no means yes? Who taught you that logic? Ollie. After a while, he rested his forehead against mine, sighing softly. I don't want a divorce. Chapter 16. Andrew said he didn't want a divorce. I had imagined countless obstacles on the path to divorce: my brother, Andrew's parents, property division, but I never expected to fail at the first step. He didn't want to. I was almost frantic. Why not? How could you not want this? Isn't this the best thing for both of us? He frowned, about to speak, but a car horn interrupted us. His car was blocking someone's way. With no choice, I got into his car, and we headed to the gala together. But as soon as I sat in the passenger seat, I realized something was off. The usually spotless back seat was piled with bags, pink ones. He had always hated anything flashy. Even the house was decorated in a cold, minimal style, so seeing these bags felt out of place. Even to me. I bought the candy you like, he said softly as he drove. There's also some in the glove compartment. From now on, if you feel unwell or just want something sweet, you don't have to hide it from me, he added. I've put it around the house too. Andrew, I also found 2 good Sichuan and Hunan chefs. Whatever you feel like eating, whether it's spicy or sweet, I'll eat it with you. I'll even learn how to cook it. I'll try to come home earlier from now on, to have dinner with you. On weekends, whatever you want to do, movies, amusement parks, I'll go with you. You don't have to force yourself to attend social events if you don't want to. If what bothers you is margarita, I can explain. Over the years, the company has been doing charity work in education, but I didn't choose the schools. The office made those decisions after evaluating the options. It was just a coincidence that Margarita's school was chosen. I only found out recently. The letters of thanks were always handled by the office. I hadn't seen them until a few days before you did. My father heard about them, so I asked the office to organize them to bring to him over the weekend. The croissants and black coffee. He sighed. One of the cafe employees used to work at the university cafe. When he lost his job, I offered him one here. Margarita used to work at the university cafe too, so he remembered her and her preferences. Maybe my attitude that night led you to misunderstand, but I really think of her as just someone from the past, someone who has nothing to do with us, someone who doesn't matter. Andrew, Ollie, he interrupted, pulling the car over. Don't rush to reject me. Hear me out. I thought about it all night last night. I haven't done well in this marriage, but I can change. People who realize their mistakes and correct them deserve another chance, don't they? Chapter 17. I was still in a daze by the time I arrived at the venue. After politely greeting the other ladies, I wanted to catch my breath and headed to the balcony. To my surprise, I ran into a familiar face there. Duncan, my childhood friend. I walked over. Well, isn't it the famous Mrs. Liu? He raised an eyebrow and smiled when he saw me. Long time no see. His mouth was as irritating as ever. How are you? I asked, knowing he was the illegitimate child of the Tang family and had gotten into trouble last year for fighting, making things difficult for him in the Tang household. Doing all right. He pulled out a cigarette and offered me one. Want one? I hesitated. Better not. Quit smoking. Huh? If someone catches me, I'll have to deal with a PR nightmare. TCH. Boring. He pointed to the thick woods beyond the balcony. If there's someone hiding there taking photos, I'll swallow the entire forest. Do you believe me? I couldn't help but laugh, feeling a bit of the stress lift. Fine. Give me one. That's more like it. Seeing you earlier, I almost thought you were depressed. I smiled. Still no job lately? He shrugged nonchalantly. Duncan, have you considered working at my little company? I knew he had a real talent for design. What's this? Mrs. Liu is stepping out into the working world herself now. He raised an eyebrow. Too tired to argue with him, I picked up my phone and sent him the company info. The company is still getting back on its feet, so the salary isn't great, but I really hope you'll consider joining. Got it. He scratched his ear but suddenly looked past me toward the doorway. I turned around and saw Andrew. My first instinct was to quickly stub out the cigarette. Andrew didn't smoke, and he disliked the smell. He came over, frowned at Duncan, then looked at me. Why are you smoking? It's not good for your health, he said softly. Duncan glanced between the two of us. You didn't know she smokes? Duncan suddenly spoke up. She started 5 years ago. Andrew froze. Buddy. Duncan stepped forward with a smirk, patting Andrew on the shoulder. You've been married for 5 years. right? Don't tell me I know your wife better than you do. Chapter 18. Duncan left, and I was alone with an obviously upset Andrew. Listen, I sighed. Don't misunderstand. I didn't mean to hide it from you. It's just that when we first got married, I had to deal with all those society ladies and the media. Sometimes the pressure was so much I couldn't sleep. So when I was home alone, I smoked a little. The more I explained, the worse his expression became. I thought for a moment and added, Duncan and I checked earlier. No one's hiding, so you don't need to worry about any PR issues. You think I'm worried about someone taking pictures of you smoking? He said abruptly. I froze. Aren't you? He sighed. Ollie, have I disappointed you that much? I paused, not quite sure how to answer. Disappointed? Of course, I was. The more I had hoped, the more I had been let down. But after so many disappointments, you get used to it. Now that we decided to get divorced, what was the point of these pointless accusations? I shook my head. No, I haven't been disappointed. And besides, I don't really smoke anymore. I don't have that kind of social pressure. So, you can talk about your stress with Duncan but not with me? I was taken aback. If I had to say, can we really talk about everything? I asked. He nodded. Well, my only stress right now, I said, looking up seriously, is whether we can get our divorce done smoothly, and the sooner, the better. Andrew's face darkened. I felt exasperated. He was the one who wanted me to say it. After a long moment, he took my hand. Only one thing, he said. Ollie, only the divorce is not happening. Chapter 19. After that day, Andrew changed a lot. While I was working at the new company, I often received gifts from him, sweets, flowers, home-cooked meals, and, of course, the man himself, showing up unexpectedly from time to time. The younger people at the office, unaware of our impending divorce, would praise him, saying my husband really knew how to show his love. Only Duncan, who had joined my company, would smirk knowingly every time he saw the things Andrew sent. He'd shake his head as he smiled. A month later, we were working on a project bid, and Duncan and I had been pulling long hours for several days to fix a small detail. When it was finally finished, I stretched and glanced at Duncan, who looked just as relieved. He usually took work pretty casually, and I'd never seen him so serious before. I laughed. Duncan looked at me, puzzled. I explained with a smile. I feel like I've accidentally found a hidden gem. Duncan chuckled. It's more like I'm gracing you with my presence. Sure. I gave in to his attitude. Standing up. Let's go. It's late. Want to grab some supper? Sounds good. But isn't someone supposed to pick you up today? He paused, looking toward the door. See, I knew it. I turned to look. Andrew was standing at the entrance. Duncan lazily packed his things, waved at me, and said, I'm off. Don't forget you owe me supper. I nodded. I know. After Duncan left, it was just Andrew and me in the office. He walked over silently, holding a thermos. Have you eaten? He asked softly. I have, I replied. A brief silence. Andrew, I think. Before I could finish, he suddenly pulled me into his arms. He hugged me tightly. Andrew? I stiffened instinctively. What's wrong? He didn't answer, only taking a deep breath. The clock on the wall ticked in the background. I'm jealous, he finally said softly. Ollie, I'm jealous. Chapter 20. I never imagined that one day Andrew would hold me and tell me he was jealous. Earlier, you asked me why I wouldn't agree to the divorce. Do you know why? It's because I can't bear the thought of you being with someone else. Just now, standing at the door, seeing you smile so beautifully, so happily at him, I couldn't stop the jealousy from welling up inside me. I know there's nothing between you and Duncan, but I'm still going crazy with envy. I remained quietly in his embrace. Andrew, you also asked me why I wanted a divorce, right? He stiffened. I've been Mrs. Lou for 5 years, with my whole world revolving around my husband. But when I look back, I realize I lost myself in the process. Andrew, I don't want to be Mrs. Lou anymore. I want to be Alicia again. I want to live for myself. I gently pushed him away. It's been 5 years. Can we part on good terms? He shook his head, his eyes reddening. I hesitated, then moved to leave. Unexpectedly, he grabbed my hand. Just once, can you give me one more chance? His hand was so warm. All right. I said softly. If by the end of the year you step down as CEO of Lu Corporation, we won't divorce. He froze. What? That's my only condition. He hesitated. Ollie, that's too harsh. I shook my head and tried to pull my hand away, but he wouldn't let go. That's the only condition. Nothing else will do. After a long pause, he finally released my hand. I understand, he said. Chapter 21. Step down? My brother was shocked for a moment, then burst into laughter, shaking his head. No way. If Andrew steps down, I'll give you my head to use as a football. I know. The situation with the Lu family was complicated. The old master of the Lu family had two sons, Andrew's uncle and Andrew's father. Unlike the rest of the Lu family, Andrew's father wasn't interested in business. He was an astrophysicist. Originally, the old master intended to pass the company to his elder son's family, but Andrew's two cousins were incompetent and caused some trouble 6 years ago. As a result, Andrew took over the company, but his cousins never accepted this, and over the years, they caused plenty of chaos in the company, always eyeing the CEO position. Andrew didn't grow up in the family estate and wasn't as close to the old master as his cousins were. Now that the old master was getting older, his judgment wasn't always clear. Andrew's parents, both scientists, couldn't offer him much help in securing his position in the Lu family. I knew better than anyone how hard Andrew had worked over the past 5 years to stabilize his position. So, he would never step down. And I was right. After I made that request, Andrew didn't contact me again. 3 months passed in the blink of an eye. I threw myself into my work, and the company finally started showing signs of improvement. Duncan and the other employees were encouraged, and I could see how much Duncan had changed over this period as well. On December 31st, the company held a small year-end party. We had dinner and sang together. My brother also attended. Everyone was in high spirits, my brother especially, singing and dancing like crazy, completely abandoning his usual image. At around 11 p.m., as we left the karaoke bar, it began to snow. Some of the rowdier ones immediately started a snowball fight. Across the street, a large screen on the mall was broadcasting a TV show. My brother was rambling behind me, and as a snowflake landed on my eyelash, I rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, I saw Andrew on the screen. He was as handsome as ever, being interviewed by reporters. Mr. Lu, can you tell us the reason behind your sudden resignation as CEO of Lu Corporation? Andrew smiled calmly. No special reason. I just want to take a break, to spend time with my wife. Chapter 22. I stood there, staring at the screen. Turning around, I saw my brother's shocked face. When our eyes met, he raised his right hand and quietly rubbed his neck. Just then, my phone rang. Hello? Where are you? The voice on the other end was as gentle as ever. City Center, by the clock tower. I'll be there in half an hour. Andrew, Ollie, you need to keep your promise. His voice was firm, more than ever before. Wait for me. Chapter 23. At 11:45 p.m., I saw Andrew at the clock tower. He walked through the snow, snowflakes landing on his shoulders and hair, making him look almost dreamlike. Was this really necessary? We stood facing each other. I kept my head down and spoke softly. You resigned. What if you can't go back? He shook his head and smiled easily. If I can't go back, then I can't go back. I looked away. 5 years of hard work, and you're just throwing it all away. Such a reckless move. He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. So, you are worried about me, aren't you? He took a step closer. So, I still have a chance, right? Andrew, he handed me a stack of papers. It was the divorce agreement. I froze, confused, and looked at him. These past 3 months, while I was processing my resignation, I thought about a lot of things. Ollie, I've stepped down, but I don't want to force you to stay in this marriage. He paused. I've already signed the divorce papers. If that's the case, then why did you resign? I was even more confused. No businessman makes a bad deal. He smiled. I want to exchange my resignation for something else. Is that okay? Something else? I stared at him blankly. He reached out and brushed the snow from my hair. I want to exchange it for a chance to start over. He lowered his head, and I looked up. Our eyes met, and I saw a warmth in his gaze I had never seen before. A chance for me to win you back. Chapter 24. At 12:59, I signed my name on the divorce agreement. From now on, I would no longer be the perfect Mrs. Liu that everyone spoke of. I was just Alicia, myself. The clock tower struck midnight, and Andrew and I both looked up at the falling snow. The new year has begun. I murmured, yeah, and his eyes sparkled as he extended his hand to me. Happy New Year, Alicia. I'm Andrew. I looked at him and smiled. Happy New Year, Andrew. I reached out my hand as well. I'm Alicia. Chapter 25 Epilogue. Secretary Lee always felt that in the 2 years since Mr. Liu's divorce, his workload hadn't really lightened much, because Mr. Liu was still very busy. It's just that before, Mr. Liu was busy with work, but now he was busy dating, and Secretary Lee couldn't help but think that Mr. Liu's relationship with his ex-wife seemed to have improved after the divorce. Take now, for instance, he had come to the mall to deliver Mr. Liu's car keys, only to find him sitting in the soft seating area of the mall's atrium, gently coaxing his ex-wife in his arms. Stop it, he heard her say softly, shaking off Mr. Liu's hand. But Mr. Liu wasn't angry at all. He just kept gently stroking her hair. Let me blow on it for you. Just leave me alone. She pouted. If I don't, your eyes will be swollen like little buns tomorrow. Mr. Liu's voice was terrifyingly gentle. When we get home, I'll roll an egg over them for you. How does that sound? Secretary Lee clicked his tongue twice in his heart. Clearly, Mr. Liu had done something to upset his wife, but the next second, he heard her sobbing. It's your fault. You dragged me to watch that tearjerker. We shouldn't have come. Wait, what? Just because of a movie? Secretary Lee suddenly felt like retreating into his shell, but what he didn't expect was that Mr. Liu nodded in agreement, his tone scarily indulgent. Yes, it's all my fault. So, should I be punished by holding an ice pack on your eyes all night? In your dreams, she huffed. Then how about I peel a piece of candy for you? Secretary Lee felt that if he kept watching this PDA, he'd have the urge to poke out his own eyes. He quietly retreated 5 meters away. After all, the old Mr. Liu and Mrs. Liu weren't like this. During their 5 years of marriage, Mr. Liu rarely spoke, and Mrs. Liu was always calm and composed. To outsiders, they seemed like the perfect couple. But Secretary Lee knew better. Their relationship hadn't been that close. Even he, as an outsider, could sense that something was off in their marriage. He'd once heard that Mr. Liu had a girlfriend in college, but when that woman left him to pursue her dreams just as he was taking over the family business and needed someone the most, it deeply hurt him. After that, it seemed Mr. Liu became wary of giving his heart to anyone again, even to his wonderful wife. Still, Secretary Lee believed that Mr. Liu did care for her. Back then, Mr. Liu would often pause in the middle of working and ask, "What's my wife's schedule today?" After Secretary Lee reported her plans, Mr. Liu would nod and go back to work. Once, Secretary Lee had even dared to suggest, "Mr. Liu, maybe you should send her a message." But Mr. Liu just stared at his phone for a long time, ultimately never picking it up. Perhaps their long-established habits were just too ingrained. Even though Secretary Lee could see that Mr. Liu was growing more and more attached to his wife, the couple still maintained their usual distance. Secretary Lee had always thought that something would go wrong sooner or later. And sure enough, one evening Mr. Liu returned to the office from home, looking utterly despondent. "Lee," his voice was barely audible. "Do you think when a wife suddenly asks for a divorce, she might just be saying it in the heat of the moment?" Secretary Lee was startled. "Not necessarily. My wife often threatens to divorce me when we argue. Once she even tore up our marriage certificate, twice, but the next day, I apologized, and she forgot all about it." Mr. Liu's eyes lit up with a glimmer of hope. But Secretary Lee thought for a moment before deciding to be honest. "I don't think Mrs. Liu would bring up divorce lightly." That statement hit Mr. Liu hard. The little spark of hope in his eyes was extinguished in an instant. That night, Mr. Liu sat in the office all night long. It seemed like from that night on, Mr. Liu began to change. He started asking where he could find good Sichuan chefs, asked how Secretary Lee managed his own relationship with his wife, asked all sorts of little things that he never used to care about. He even started calling and texting Mrs. Liu frequently, something he'd never done before. When Mrs. Liu went to work, Mr. Liu would often visit her. Secretary Lee found this quite heartening. Mr. Liu recognized his mistakes and was actively working to fix them. But still, the couple got divorced. What Secretary Lee didn't expect was that after the divorce, they started dating again. After resigning from his position as CEO, Mr. Liu devoted all his time to Mrs. Liu. She was always busy with work, so Mr. Liu would deliver meals to her every day, driving her to and from the office. Eventually, Mrs. Liu got so fed up that she told him she wasn't interested in dating an unemployed man. So, Mr. Liu, who had left Liu Corporation for his wife, rejoined Liu Corporation for her as well. Secretary Lee knew that Mrs. Liu had said that on purpose. Even he thought it was a shame for Mr. Liu to leave the company. So of course, his wife, who had supported him all along, must have felt the same. But Mr. Liu, since they started dating again, had become a bit possessive. Like the day Mrs. Liu texted Secretary Lee, saying she would drop by the company later to pick something up. Being considerate, Secretary Lee immediately informed Mr. Liu. To his surprise, Mr. Liu wasn't pleased. I texted her 3 hours ago, and she hasn't replied. He frowned. Why would she text you instead? Secretary Lee could only chuckle awkwardly. He wanted to retort. She used to text me more often than you back then, but he didn't dare say it. As a dutiful employee, he swallowed his frustration and politely reminded Mrs. Liu to reply to Mr. Liu's message. Secretary Lee had thought they'd remarry quickly, but 2 years passed, and neither seemed in a hurry, until, on New Year's Eve of the 3rd year, while leaving after some overtime work, Secretary Lee noticed the lights were still on in the CEO's office. Mr. Liu rarely worked late anymore, so he assumed someone had forgotten to turn off the lights. He went over to check, but as he cracked open the door, he saw Mr. Liu standing with his back to the door, nervously practicing something with a script in his hand. On the desk beside him was a ring box. Secretary Lee gently closed the door and, glancing out the floor-to-ceiling window, saw a petite figure just stepping out of a car in the snow below. He smiled, realizing he had accidentally stumbled upon something big. As he walked toward the elevator, he glanced back at the CEO's office. "Good luck, Mr. Liu," he whispered, "wishing you success."